people know. James, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm James. I'm based in London, in the UK. And a fact about my teeth is that my elderly nan is convinced that my teeth aren't my own and that I've been wearing dentures for as long as I've been alive.
Why?
It's kind of, it's difficult to explain. She's like 92 and her memory isn't exactly where it was. And every conversation I have with her now seems to circulate back to the topic of teeth in a kind of strange way, and whether or not I have dentures. Yeah.
Very interesting. Kit, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. One sec. Hey, I'm Kit. So I'm in Iowa City, Iowa, currently. Name, location, tooth fact, correct? Yes. I'm in Iowa City, Iowa, and my teeth don't close. This is my mouth closed. I can't close it more. It makes eating things a little bit difficult, especially like a burrito, because if you're eating a burrito, you need to be able to close down on the thing to separate the bit that you want to bite from the bit that you don't want to bite, or it just keeps coming. So what you have to do is, it's maybe too much detail, but what you have to do is you either have to use your tongue to press the burrito against the top teeth to sever the continuity, or you have to cram enough of the burrito into your mouth that your teeth further back can do the job for you.
Delightful.
I'm learning so much about my fellow editors.
Piper, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Piper. I'm in Oakland, California. A fact about my teeth is that I was at a party in 2007 and I met this woman who was like, "Hello, it's nice to meet you. I really like your teeth." And then she basically walked away and I've never forgotten her. John, would you like to go?
I'm Nesta, and I'm currently in St. Petersburg, Russia. And one fact about my teeth is that I once had a root canal.
Nasta, can you speak up a little? Okay, that was very quiet, but I know a fact about Nastia's teeth that maybe they were saying, which is that they had a root canal without anesthesia. And that's it for the editors present, right? Okay, so why don't we plan to start with Catherine, if that's okay? So Catherine Kim is a Korean Canadian writer and MFA student at Brown University's Literary Arts program. Her work has appeared in Nat Brute, the Nameless Woman anthology, the Transcendent series, and elsewhere. And her writing was shortlisted for the Sunburst Award in 2020. And I'd like to share just a content warning about what she's about to read, death and graphic descriptions of a corpse.
So should I begin?
Go for it. Thanks.
So I'll be reading two pieces today. One of them is from the issue called Transliterations, and that's part of a longer sequence from which I'll be reading another piece afterwards, if that's all right with everyone. I realize now I could have looked up the Korean on my phone or asked the coroner if he spoke English, though at the time my instinct was to turn to my mother, as we've always done for each other, to find the words that clung to the tips of our tongues in the mouth of the other. I didn't ask her this question, as I couldn't explain the urge that had overcome me, like I was a child again left alone in the house, looking to uncover the secret I was certain my father must have hidden somewhere in his domain. Though what dragon keeps his wish-fulfilling jewel sheltered in his ribcage? Perhaps, bereft as I was of his last words, I thought I could find the heart of him in the organ itself, and that even in the embrace of another's hands, he would reveal himself to me and so immortalize himself in memory. The details always fade, and only the unknowing is suspended in time, like dead cells clumped together in the corner of a glass eye. Later, I would learn that his heart had suffocated in his sleep, which I thought was a lovely poem itself, though the coroner found neither jewels nor dreams inside him. 부검을 볼 수 있을까요? Could I watch the autopsy? Hangul is sometimes praised as a scientific writing system, due to its consonant letters reflecting the shape and the articulation of the speech organs used to pronounce them. Its vowels, however, are derived from ancient Chinese philosophy, with its three basic shapes representing the flat earth, the sun and heavens, and the human as the mediator between heaven and earth. The word for father in Korean is spelled apochi, though my native tongue has long been stuck in childhood and cast in salt, so I spell his name like this, Appa. The first syllable block, A, is simply its vowel sound, which forms the shape of the human reaching out to grasp the sun, hoping to pluck the heavenly orb, paired with a null consonant, Iang, which was once a different letter than the dorsal consonant, though in modern times, the opening of the throat into the mouth is a silent circle. In this way, A is both the sound that emptied itself from my grandmother's throat as she beheld the outline of her son under the shroud, and the shape of the cadaver itself when viewed from the side of the gurney. The consonant has empty head and neck, the vowel is falling into the sky, which is also the lines the scalpel would form over his torso during the autopsy. The second syllable block, pa, consists of a tense bilabial consonant paired with the same vowel sound. The letter sangbyeop is a transfiguration of the lips from their outline when they're held together in mium to when they part to release a burst of air in byup, which is then doubled into its final shape. I do not remember if his jaws were clenched or if I'd said farewell to his crooked teeth, though I know that his lips had captured the tint of impossible flowers. And when I asked the attendant to roll him out of the fridge so I could see his face again, they left a stain on his shroud, like petals crumbled over cloth, which I later realized was dead skin torn from his mouth. In this way, pa is the last word when the testament is a kiss, which is a spirit rising from the body into the heavens, which is my mother's lips on the glass that separates the gallery from the furnace as her beloved goes up in smoke. Pa is nearly a false cognate for the informal address for father, and so together, Appa might sound like a child's lamentation for her father whenever she calls for him, which is forever my address for him, though I may spin the gears of his pocket watch until salt returns to flesh and the taste of his rot evaporates from my tongue. So the second piece is called Oscillations, and it's a work in progress that's not been published yet. Haunted again by the absence of a certain sound, she asks me to play a song for her on his piano. I pull back the pendulum to leash my heartbeat to its tempo as I reacquaint myself with the yellowed keys. And perhaps I might capture the shape of his mouth in my own, as I do in my hands when I sing for her, I love you, though not in these words, and not in these notes, and not in my voice. Metronomes set to the same frequency and resting on the same bass, when released at different intervals, will synchronize with one another over time. This is how two pendulum clocks, mounted on a single frame, couple in their oscillations, as old lovers might reach out for one another, but only in turns, one the dreamer, and the other the lonely psychopomp, patient at their bedside. Though there is a tragedy in this, that no matter how long one might press their fingers into the crook of the other's neck, their hearts will never settle into a single pace. I might be consoled by the imperfect fit of his ghost in my mouth, which breathes in when I do out, so that neither of us might drown again in the flat of the empty air. Her grandparents, having passed in the same month, as if one waited for the other to put their affairs in order before reaching out to grasp a sleeping face, lie beneath an overlook on a mountain with their ancestors, with a view of the village and its rice paddies and the winding road into the city. Still a child, this was my first encounter with death, as it would forever be her understanding of love. She instructed me to embrace the burial mound as I had their human shapes, as if the bump in the dirt were an errant knee, rising beneath the grassy sheets in the vertex of their endless stream. And in the way a child might press her ear against the mound of her mother's breast to capture the sound of her heart, I spoke into the earth a prayer for the barley crackers and the wildflowers and the bright red socks that were their gifts to me that evening before they slipped back into bed, as she knelt with her forehead pressed against the dirt to measure their reply. Nowadays, she sleeps when the sun is awake. At night, she paces back and forth on the balcony, her shadow the spine of a pendulum against the curtains. During the day, I wait by her bedside to observe the swing of her heart. Beneath the empty sky, with my head on the pillow next to hers, I ask her to stay with me a little longer, for as long as I wind the crown to entrap her in the stretch of a watch face between his clock hands, which reach forever outside the frame.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Before we move on to Gabby's piece, could you share with us something about your teeth?
I think this has come up already about with someone, one of your editors, about having a root canal without anesthetic, except it was unexpected for me because the dentist did it in 2 stages. And to prepare for the anesthetic, they prescribed me some medication so the anesthetic would work, except they forgot to prescribe it to me for the second round. So it worked when they went in and started the second part of the root canal, and then it stopped working in the middle. And so they didn't really stop, but that's my tooth story.
Thanks. So our next reader will be Gabi Shiner, a multidisciplinary writer and performer based in Brooklyn. Her work concerns trauma and the construction of the self. She's also a comedian. Her comedy has appeared in Reductress and on stage at the Brooklyn Comedy Collective. And she requests that we all please follow her on Twitter, Gabi Shiner. I'll type that in the chat so that everyone can go do that now. And when you're ready, go ahead and read, Gabby.
Thank you so much for passing on my desperate plea for reaching 1K. It's a terrible game we're all in.
Maybe today.
Catherine, maybe today. Ah! Okay. Catherine, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing those poems. Definitely a lot to think about. Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm coming to you from unceded Manse Lenape and Canarsie land. And I'm going to be reading a few scenes from my piece Bridge Tooth. Yeah, oh, and I just wanted to give a content warning for gore and implied sexual violence. So whatever you need to do to take care, someone just followed me, sorry. Whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, please do that. All right. Okay. I was 4 and watching The Sound of Music with my family and postured a couch cushion upright like a hill, then stepped up on it and sang, "The hills are alive." But I only got to alive before the cushion collapsed and I fell flat on my face with a stinging thud and shards of old carpeting got in my now frayed chin. Pain shot out through the back of my head. I was hurried to the sink to get cleaned up, eyes shut tight, and when I opened them, my mother was there and my sibling was there. And I saw myself cry in the mirror, bloody, bringing me out of a vacuous moment of confusion and darkness. I think I smiled, relieved to finally meet myself again in my gory reflection. My tooth was severely bruised and blackened, but far back enough in my mouth that I could not see it, even when I hooked my cheek with my finger and craned my neck in the mirror. I could only feel the change in its shape, a newfound arch-like concavity. I, a child with a penchant for nonsensical naming, hockey stick was hockey slugger, blanket was Blanca, plastic bag stuck in the tree outside my house was Bagina, an overly confident Adam naming inanimate objects like they were animals, called the damaged tooth my bridge tooth. The nickname was unsettling to my mother. Her eyes widened the first time I announced it, standing across from her in her bedroom. In her pupils, I saw myself as some kind of alien. I was convinced that it was my playful utterance that contorted her face into pale horror. I now understand that she had watched friction betray me on the carpet, seen me careen into the underlying hardwood, and watched my pearly baby tooth get blasted through with discoloration, blotted like a Rorschach. It was not the first time any of these things had happened. The shame she saw in my damage was my father's. Egoless in the orthodontist's waiting room, I was a steel trap for shame. The multi-roomed office, located in a narrow, shingled 2-story, was a winding funhouse, each turn amplifying my self-flagellation. Squeezed into a yellow chair, I'd shift focus back and forth between a poster featuring sun-kissed girls wearing Invisalign, a technology unfit for my irregularly angled teeth, and the flat screen, which played the muted Daddy Daycare DVD menu on an endless loop. Nauseated by the shifting images, I'd beat myself up for not working on my homework instead. The sound of my own name, called out by the receptionist in aggravation, was a knell. It signaled me to head to an alcove with a sink where I'd brush my teeth, assessing my culpability in their uncleanliness by counting the shreds of food I'd neglected to dig out of my braces and swallow. I'd then wait in a chaise for the hygienist to take a first pass over my teeth, kicking myself for my too low iPod battery, which, due to my lack of preparedness, guaranteed that I'd spend most of the appointment aware that I was lying prone, tired and small, luring hulking figures to hover over me. One of them would arrive and I'd open my mouth for them, making way for the insertion of a plastic apparatus that would leave my shoddy oral hygiene on display for any passersby. Every now and then, the hygienist would take a break from yanking worn elastics from my braces and rest her pliers on my dry gums. With an irritated sigh, she'd look above my eyes and say, "You need to brush more." My teeth, it seemed, invited plaque to fester. I'd hear it again when the orthodontist, Dr. Miller, came around to take a final look, leaving only the thin, permeable membrane of his glove between my tongue and his finger. Mouth aching, I'd walk home. My father's office shared a window with the mudroom immediately off of the back door. He was the first to hear when you got home and the first person you'd pass on the way to any other part of the house. Even if you took a hard turn into the kitchen, he was situated at an angle that allowed him to quickly register your decision not to greet him face to face. Sometimes someone else would run to greet you, but often you two were alone. You knew as soon as the echo of the door closing was replaced by his computer keys clacking, overriding the tail end of your exhale. My father must have sensed the weight I was holding, eyes downcast, even from the next room. He'd tell me to come sit on his lap and tell him all about the bad feeling, and I would. Two sounds from the day I had the roof of my mouth sliced open. I lay down in the office of oral surgeon Dr. Jonathan Sachs, hooked up to a stream of nitrous oxide. The doctor, Australian and gregarious, finished adjusting the mask and said, "Now, Gabby, if anything hurts, just tell me. And if you start to giggle from the laughing gas, that's okay." I did not giggle. I felt flushed, sweaty, and gone, the sound of my iPod overpowered by the aggressive hum of the gas machine. I could feel everything. The pulsing of the freshly cut wound in my soft palate, every jagged link in the gold chain forming the hopeful bridge between my newly exposed, stubborn tooth and the bracket on my molar. When the sharp edge of the scalpel bumped up against the weights glued to my teeth, ache shot through my face, cross-sectioning the stinging feeling around my bleeding gums. I remembered Dr. Sachs's offer to tell him if it hurt. The whole time, I presumed that if I told him he was hurting me, he would do something to lessen the pain. He must have had some antidote that was deployable in accordance with the signal. "It hurts," I cried. "Sorry, Gabby," he said, and continued on as he had. I sat home in pain all day. Body depleted, ache in the roof of my mouth persistent. I felt too weak to muster any restraint against the pain pulsing in reliable rhythm, intensity never lessening. Restricted to soft foods, I drank half of a single coffee ice cream milkshake, which instantly made me sick. 24 hours later, in a rumpled camisole and faded limited 2 shorts, I knelt on the cold tile of the downstairs bathroom and threw up for a 6th time. My loud retching barely interrupted my family dinner in the adjacent kitchen. I had been at the table, in spite of my queasiness. Peeking out from behind the bathroom door, I moaned that I needed to go lie down, upset with myself for not making it through the meal. My father consoled me from his seat. "It's natural that you get sick after surgery. A foreign object has been inserted. The body is in shock." I remembered the sounds when the orthodontist squabbled over my rightmost bicuspid, which had not descended gracefully. There was always a chance, they told me like OR doctors huddling with the family of the critically injured, that one of the teeth would come in rotated. One of them did, almost a perfect 90 degrees askew. "You need to brush more" was soon usurped and compounded by, "We have to turn that tooth around." At the end of each appointment, I was informed that whatever contraption had been installed to realign my asymmetrical smile, the gold chain, a bracket that just barely fit over the angular edge of the tooth, a brutalist band reserved for teeth that needed to be gripped and jolted into place, was barely, or too slowly, doing its job. The scolding, though it stung, began to feel as useless as the failed orthodontic machinery. I became frustrated and despondent. I stopped taking my earbuds out in anticipation when Dr. Miller came around to frantically conference with my hygienist. His nags were now half muted, and even though he stuck his face in mine to chastise me, I blatantly rolled my eyes. My attention shifted inward to the pressure in my chest, where I could feel the echo of my mid-operation plea. Its wavelengths, dampening fleeting sounds, ping-ponged off my back, mingling with the sustained murmur I already recognized. All right. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. We just learned already quite a bit about your teeth. Any tidbit to add?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about how most of my worst is in there, so I thought I'd just throw in a fun one. A nice post credits for you all. So I did a few years back go to my dentist for a consultation about. Can I show it? I'm going to show it. For this, which is like my problematic tooth, because I had been told it was super problematic. And she's a Boston dentist. So I went to her and she was like, first of all, you know you're beautiful, right? You're like Julia Roberts, you're beautiful. And then I was like, oh, this is all bullshit. It's all cosmetic. So that's sort of my happy ending.
Wow, amazing. Okay, we're gonna open up the room for questions. So what I'll say is, if you have a question, maybe I'll call on people. So if you have a question, maybe just put in the chat question mark for Gabby or question mark for Catherine. Kid, go ahead.
Catherine, I have a question for you. This is a very open-ended question. So like both of these are very wide poems. There's a wideness to them. I mean, especially the Hot River poem, which has a sort of fixed line length. But the transliteration poem as well has a sort of expansiveness to it, and it also has a certain meticulousness to it. Kind of a you know, you're constantly kind of twisting the screw of this translates to this, translates to this, translates to this, and so forth. And I wondered if you could say something about wideness and meticulousness.
That's a great question. I think I'll talk about meticulousness first, because that's something I'm trying to move away from, actually, in my more recent writing. So the story behind this series of poems is that they were written for the first poetry workshop that I attended. I'm mostly a fiction writer, and I mostly write in short stories, so this was a departure for me. And in some of my nervousness at switching genres, I paid a lot of attention to making things make sense, perhaps, especially in my earlier works, more than I should have. At the same time, this was also when I was having, when I was writing works inspired by Borges. So I was thinking about like labyrinths and mechanisms and parts of the text that you could sort of play around with, or in a way that the reader could play around with and understand the mechanisms of, if that makes sense. And I wanted to sort of share the mechanisms in my head with the reader. I think that's part of where the meticulousness is coming from. In terms of the wideness, I think with looking to Han River poems, for instance, I was trying to breach out of a solipsism that's I felt was consuming my work, especially a lot of personal work, and trying to how do I put this? I think we've all heard the phrase "the personal is political," and I was trying to explore the inverse of the political being personal and how that's felt, and to try and encapsulate in that this sort of zooming in on a certain emotion or sensation or some sort of grief, the nebulousness of it, the slipperiness of it, at some point I'm just repeating synonyms, so maybe I'll stop there. But I hope that made some sense.
It sounds like it's with the second part of what you were saying. It sounds almost as though you were. I mean, in a sense, you were literally, but it sounds as though you were sort of trying to do a mapping rather than narrative. That makes sense.
I was looking at how to read the personal into geography, how to read like bodies into rivers as I do rivers into texts.
Thank you.
Piper?
Yeah, I have a question for Gabby. I guess.
Piper, can you speak up?
Yes. Is that better? Okay. Gabby, in thinking about this piece, I was wondering if you would talk about the genesis of it. And I guess I'm wondering, like, the tooth trauma and your other childhood traumas kind of like get really overlapped in this piece. And I'm wondering about whether that came from our theme or if this essay would have been about teeth even without kind of like an external prompt for that.
That is a great question. So excitingly, it did not just come from the theme. I've been thinking about my childhood trauma in relationship to my more mundane childhood trauma of orthodontia for a long time. This was originally, and I knew I wanted to talk about my teeth for so long in this way because I think one of the places that is like sanctioned in the ordinary to experience violation, like aside from all of them, is the orthodontist, is the dentist. And there's definitely something very like dominant about that relationship. But it's felt. So I think I truly did, I can identify sort of like feelings of trauma and trauma memories and triggers. I can like the dentist was always a more potent site for those feelings. And it was sort of like a symbol that had followed me. And I was originally going to try to do a one-woman show with these anecdotes. And then I don't really know. I mean, I guess the other stuff, because I've been thinking about the other stuff a lot this year, I think it sort of like cosmically fell into place. And I'll like show my hand a little bit. So in early drafts of this essay, I was considering incorporating this academic article called The Telltale Teeth, Psychodontia and Sociodontia by Theodore Zolkowski. And that was really more about the potency of teeth throughout Western literature. And I think like the literary analysis is where I was able to sort of put two and two together and contextualize like the significance, because there's always like the sense that there's something weird happening with your teeth, obviously. But I think, yeah, in like the literary realm, I was able to sort of contextualize the significance of like a tooth as something that like gnaws at you in a more concise way.
I'll ask you another question, Gabby. And I noticed that the selections from your piece that you chose to read today left out a lot of sort of the heavy theoretical stuff, which might be a good choice for a live reading. But I did want to ask you something about mirrors, which did come up in what you read today, with the view of yourself as a bleeding child greeting a mirror with recognition and joy. But in some of the rest, you have this Lacanian analysis of this mirror that kind of creates wholeness and then maybe takes it away or opens the door toward a sort of social world that shatters that wholeness. So I have a kind of rude, blunt question, which is, are mirrors good or bad?
Kid is good. I think mirrors are okay. Well, let me answer this in like a long-winded way, but short enough that you won't all hate me. So I think that, okay, how do I say this? I think that mirrors are now sort of just incidental along with everything else. I feel like there is this narrative, or like the narrative of the mirror stage and how I've seen the mirror stage used in like personal narratives. Like you're free and then you meet the mirror and then you're fucked. And I think that's sort of like the overarching narrative of like selfhood that we have going in the zeitgeist of like the idea that it's like a causal, like time for growth ritual. I've been knighted with this horrible alienating identity. But I think that, yes, so I think that I almost feel like asking if mirrors are good or bad is sort of like asking if technology is good or bad. Like at a certain, like you're already so mediated by other people's mirrorings by the time you are like arrived onto this earth. And it's just sort of like, I'll get back to technology, but you're already so mediated. You have so many selves going in you that by the time you look at a mirror, it's just another interlocutor. And I guess why I bring up technology is because maybe that's another place where we sort of see this like tragic fall being placed in the narrative of self-development, of like, oh, everything was fine before we had our phones, which is like true and not true. And I think especially in the instance of like child sexual abuse, which my piece concerns, there really is like, it's so clear that there's no neutral mirror. But then, yeah, so good or bad, I kind of just, can I like not answer your question? I guess good, because they can be good sometimes. Okay.
Thank you. Erica?
Hi. So I have a question for Catherine, but I also have a comment that I want to make related to what Gabby just said, which is, as you were speaking, Gabby, I was thinking of the recognition studies that they do on animals to see if they have a sense of self, which is that, as I'm sure a lot of you know, they paint a dot on their forehead and then they show them a mirror. And if they touch their own face, then the idea is that they've understood that the mirror is them. And if they touch the mirror, the idea is that they don't understand that. And I was thinking, maybe it's not that the animals that don't touch their face don't recognize themselves. Maybe it's that they just don't care. Anyway, my question for Catherine concerns the sort of postscript at the end of your piece. So you write that the collection of poems of which the two you shared today are a part are about what happens when mourning becomes another failure of kinship. And I was really struck by that phrasing. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that idea. Thank you.
Certainly. So, how do I put this? The phrase "a failure of kinship" came to me when from one of my professors who used the phrase "a failure of imagination." And I can't exactly remember the context, but it had something to do about poetry. I have a really bad memory. And the idea that sorry, let me rewind a bit because I don't think I can. I don't think I'll say that properly. Thinking about so the sequence is about like this wasn't the sort of characters. I'd say characters, but I'm really talking about like myself and my family. Are about the sort of some of the distances that we've had with each other, our failures to connect with one another, whether through geographic distance or sort of emotional intimacy or what have you. And to have something monumental as a death or a funeral or the mourning afterwards to become another step in that sequence of failures is something that I'm interested in the sequence. One of the sort of introductory work to the sequence that I have so far is a collection of dates and also a collection of separations in those dates, and sort of the ways that it's impossible to configure the dates as I have set them up in a way that they're always connected to like each member of the family is connected all the time. And so there's with failure of kinship, it's that there's an effort to connect the family together. There's an investment, but it never lands. It doesn't quite slot in together. But there's something that it's not solely a disappointment in that regard. There's something meaningful that comes out of that as well. Something that I find out about myself, and that I think my family members have found about themselves through these failures. That's sort of an overly elaborate answer for that question, if any of that made sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I have another question for you, Catherine. I'm not 100% sure it's a question, but maybe based on my question for Gabby, that's a good thing. So bodies, I'm really interested in the way that bodies play a role in your poems. You mentioned that one of your projects out of solipsism is to map the personal onto the geographical, and bodies onto the Han River, and in the unpublished poem you read today, a spine onto a curtain and a heartstring onto the sky. And then in transliterations, it's like this project of mapping something personal or something significant onto a dead body in the way that language maps significance onto our mouth movements and the shapes of letters. And it just strikes me that bodies sort of do this double role of being, I don't know, that which is most personal and that which is sort of the material onto which you can put significance, but maybe don't have significance themselves. Like I said, not really a question, but I was wondering if you could comment.
Certainly. So I think talking about geography in the body, it's as I explained in my preface conclusion, the author's note, that the events that precipitated these poems occurred when I was thinking a lot about and writing a lot, trying to write a lot about the body as a contested site, as something you struggle or fight over, particularly when it's your body that you're trying to occupy for yourself, or that others are trying to occupy for you. And that's sort of how I got the body and geography link. But there's also another movement that I'm trying to make in terms of sort of corporeal versus incorporeal bodies and the synchronicity between them. In a lot of the sequence, I write about slipping into the ghostly body with the physical body, sort of inhabiting the same spaces, making the same movements, and in transliterations, making the same sounds in the throat, in the mouth, towards my father in this instance, in an effort to get closer to him, in an effort to sort of bridge connections, bridge a river, to sort of try and discover the knowledge hidden in the simulacrum. If I might imitate, or if I might inhabit the ghost of someone else's body, might I know more about them in a way that I couldn't when that sort of connection was impossible, for instance.
Thanks. Kit, did you have a question for Gabby?
I do. I've been trying to figure out how to phrase it, so I'm glad that I had a few minutes after coming up with it. So there's a theory about comedy, which is because I know you're a stand-up, and there's a theory about comedy. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it, but basically he says that the thing that is stood up when you do stand-up is the abject. So it's like a psychoanalytic theory of comedy. Basically, it's like the thing that is stood up is the thing that you can't get rid of. It's part of you, but it's not really part of you, like your fingernails. Could be your teeth, maybe your baby teeth, right? Those are kind of abject. You have these parts of you that you can't totally get rid of, but they're also, and we also have parts of society, right? It's kind of looks from the expression on your face, like maybe you know this theory, but I'm elaborating for the benefit of everyone else. So like the society also has abject members, right? It's got minorities, it's got marginalized people, it's got people who maybe aren't the core, the heart and the lungs, of society. They're fingernails, and stand up stands those things up and puts them in front of us, and that does some work, and I don't know the specifics, but so the question that I have here is, there's all these things in the structure of your piece. you have all these anecdotes. You read several of them up for us today. And I was wondering, I mean, first of all, do you want to talk about the relationship between your interest in psychoanalysis and your interest in comedy? But specifically, I thought, it's interesting to think about, you have these anecdotes and you're not like saying this is the causal connection between them, or this is the, explanatory thing or whatever. They're a little bit like fingernails. They point to the presence of a body, but they're somewhat separable from it in the sense that they like point to the presence of a trauma, but they're also somewhat extricable from it. And I wanted to know if you could say some stuff about like, I don't know, how you use anecdotes and how you think about stories, personal stories or personal narrative in the context of talking about ideas.
What was the very last word you said?
Ideas, but it didn't have to be. It could have been what you're thinking about, or structures, or anything that isn't.
Totally.
I said this bridge tooth thing when I was so and so old. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Huge question, and I'm sorry for asking it.
No, don't be sorry. Also, I'm sorry for my face. I was just thinking about like how stand-up I think stand-up should be in conversation with the abject, or should be in direct conversation with like the hysteria born out of like an abject life, and like how it's been flattened a lot into like an irreverent thing in sort of like in ways that feel disingenuous. So that's just my sort of personal gripe. And I'm in the spirit of not naming things, I'm not going to say more specific things about my gripes. But yeah, man, I mean, one thing I just like as a tangent, I've been reading Afro-Pessimism by Frank Wilderson. And it's interesting that you mention abjection as like a sort of like the realm of like marginality, because I think a lot, and I have been thinking a lot in terms of abjection as something I like enjoy and like that resonates with me aesthetically and feels like defiant. Like something he says is that abjection is actually synonymous with Blackness in the way that people, in like narrative theory and the way that we understand it. So I think that is very interesting, especially in terms of like humor in the abject. I just wanted to like put that out there. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad the anecdotes came off that way, because I think that I think when I talk about like for narrative with me, and maybe this is something that I like struggle with, but I think that like tension says a lot more than like a solidity or a sort of like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, like coda, because that's how the experiences like actually exist. I think of, and this like might not be answering your question, I guess I think of like my stand-up and my writing and like my psychoanalytic experiences, which mostly are just born out of me being like foisted into therapy as a very young child. I think of those as all interconnected as like mediations of like text and the abject. And I'm always sort of wondering like how much I should or shouldn't say the thing. And I think where I fall right now is that it's good to play with not saying the thing so that you can feel the thing. Because like, especially with trauma, it's like, there aren't really like structure, like in terms of like, we think of this as like a structuralist world. There aren't really places like the structures that we have are sort of like anti-saying. So if you are to like, and you can like manipulate them and like perform around them and with them, but you'll never like totally get it, I guess. So I don't really know where I'm going, but I think what's up?
Well, it occurs to me that this could be a way of training the reader, right? Like I've had friends say to me, this happened to me, and then this happened to me, and then this happened to me. And then 2 years later, I've had my friends say, I was abused. And there's some value in learning to hear this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and say, well, that seems right, interesting that you have this symptom, right? There's that.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think, yeah, that's something I like struggle with. I think that it's like, I think the choice, like the personal choice for me to do that is like something that I need and something that I needed to do. And I also think it's something that's like only possible every once in a while because, right, it like comes slowly and causal doesn't really compute until it does. I think like, I don't know, but I guess like artistically, it's always like an interesting, there's always something to be said for either choice. Like there's something to be said for sort of like, for like making sure that there is a through line to like what you're understanding. And then, or like a through, like, it's like in writing about trauma, I guess. Like there's something to being very explicit. And then there's something also to like not confining those experiences to like the causal formulation because people are going to think of it in a certain way if you do. I don't know, it's all like audience and stuff, but that's something I in the aftermath of writing this essay that I've thought a lot about is like, should I have been more explicit? Would that have been more beneficial to me or the audience?
So we've been here for an hour, which makes it totally acceptable time to end if there are no more questions, but also we could go on if there are. So did anyone want to ask another question?
Or also if anyone, can I jump in for a second? Also, if anyone wants to respond to something that has been said, like this doesn't have to be a strictly question. Like if anyone in the audience has a thought that bounces off something, that would be also very welcome, more than welcome.
I'll allow that.
I have a question for Gabby, who is my sister, but shh, don't tell anyone. I guess I didn't think about this until the last person asked their question, but because the subject matter is so heavy, do you see any relationship between this piece and like your comedic work? Because I know you touch upon like moments of your and our childhood in your stand-up and in your comedy writing. But do you feel like this is a completely different genre, or that there was any crossbreeding of those two crafts or interplay or conversation between them?
Thank you, Jesse. I would say there definitely crossbreeding and interplay and conversation for sure. Yeah, I think so. I think it's just like, and I think that's where like medium becomes interesting. Because, okay. I think that like a lot of my experience in comedy has like been trying not, like comedy has like an affective like goal sort of like funny. And people are like get up in arms about like not funny comedy. I personally am like, do whatever you want, but I think I guess like answering so personally. So that would be my like craft answer is like, in terms of like, yes, like the subject matter is the same, but like there's like a different, I guess, aesthetic aim that people like care more about in comedy. In terms of like a personal answer, I think that it's really hard I definitely do talk about all of this in my comedy, but I think it's really hard to escape I think it's really hard to escape that like affective requirement. And I think that what sort of ends up happening, and this might just be because I'm like less interested in trying to like manipulate the form of comedy than I am like an essay. I think what ends up happening is that you sort of like lapse into this irony where if you want to talk about if you want to talk about trauma and stuff, like the way that it becomes legible to an audience is as like a wink. So I would say, yes, definitely use it, but I think it comes out in different ways. And then I also think that like, and I guess like as a creative person, like everything is a result of like your attitude towards the object and like what it makes funny to you. Like I think like for me and for a lot of people, like their trauma like does outline and spark their comedy, but you would never know it based on what the comedy is. And I think it's an interesting thing to navigate trying to make comedy.
Thanks, Gabby. Is anyone else harboring a question or comment? Okay, so our final activity is for me to tell you all about how you can donate to our wonderful magazine to make payments to our writers possible. Now, we actually had an Indiegogo campaign that is closed, so you can't buy the stuff on Indiegogo, but you can just email us. We'll give you whatever. So let me share that list. Yeah, so we have some awesome anthologies of select articles with full color illustrations. We have this t-shirt that I would say you've been admiring me wearing this whole time, but I think it was kind of out of view. But it's amazing. It's designed by Antonia Stringer, who's a fabulous artist. And you could get editorial commentary on a piece or even extensive editorial commentary, you know, whatever you want. We have a price and we'll give it to you just by emailing us. We also have a Patreon, which is pretty cool. It's kind of a new thing. We've started sending out newsletters and other perks in association with our Patreon. So you can just go to patreon.com/hypocrite reader, and that way you can be assured that you'll be donating small amounts of money to us every month in perpetuity, which makes us incredibly happy. I want to thank Gabby and Catherine for being here and everyone else for coming. Yeah, I think, you know, it was an amazing discussion. Catherine,